Denver always felt a little too big, a little too sprawling for me. I was good with computers, brilliant even, but people? They were a different kind of algorithm, one I never quite cracked. Most days, I was happier behind a screen, deep in lines of code, or dissecting a network's hidden vulnerabilities. My world was logical, predictable, safe. Then I met Serena. It was at a cybersecurity conference in Austin, a whirlwind of buzzing energy and fluorescent lights. I was presenting on a complex encryption protocol, nervous sweat beading on my palms, my voice a monotone drone. She was in the front row, sharp eyes fixed on me, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Afterward, she approached me, praising my elegance of thought, a phrase no one had ever used to describe my work, let alone me. She was captivating, a force of nature with a quick wit and an even quicker mind. She understood my obscure jokes, finished my half-formed sentences, and saw the genius beneath the awkwardness. It was like finding the missing piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I was working on. We fell into a rhythm quickly, a deep, almost instantaneous connection. We talked for hours, late into the night, about zero-day exploits, the ethics of information warfare, the philosophical implications of AI. She was just as passionate, just as intense, but with a magnetism I lacked. She made me feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in my life. I confided in her about everything. My lifelong struggle with social anxiety, the sting of being an outsider, the crushing pressure of always having to be the smartest person in the room. I told her about my insecurities, my triumphs, my fears. I even shared the intricacies of my work, the details of the most complex security protocols I was developing for Veridian Security, the ethical dilemmas I wrestled with while probing client systems for weaknesses. I trusted her implicitly, a trust built on late-night conversations and the shared thrill of intellectual sparring. She became my confidant, my intellectual equal, my closest friend, my firewall, the one I'd painstakingly built around myself over decades, crumbled almost effortlessly under her gaze. I believed she was my safe harbor, the one person who truly understood the sprawling, messy landscape of my mind. She had this habit, I remember now, a subtle thing. Sometimes, when I'd get particularly animated, detailing a system's Achilles heel or lamenting the human factor in security breaches, she'd subtly adjust her phone. A quick tap, a quiet click. She'd say it was just for notes, that my insights were too brilliant to forget. I never questioned it. Why would I? She was Serena. She was my Serena. The thought that she could ever use anything I said against me, to betray that profound, almost spiritual connection we'd forged, was simply unthinkable. It was a blind spot, a critical vulnerability in my own personal security architecture, one I willingly, even eagerly, allowed. The hope she ignited in me was so bright, it cast no shadows. The air in the office was thick with anticipation, almost vibrating with it. Veridian Security, my company, was on the cusp of landing the biggest contract in its history, a multi-million-dollar deal with the Department of Defense. It hinged on a flawless security audit of their systems, a comprehensive deep dive into every corner, every potential exploit. My team and I had poured months into preparing for this, dissecting their network, patching every vulnerability, bulletproofing it against every conceivable threat. This was my legacy, my chance to truly cement Veridian's reputation and my own as an impenetrable force in cybersecurity. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Serena, who worked in a different division, had been strangely quiet in the weeks leading up to the audit. I knew she'd been passed over for a promotion she desperately wanted, something about a new hire being brought in from outside. She'd confided in me about her frustration, her feeling of being undervalued, but I dismissed it as typical corporate politics. I urged her to keep her chin up, reminding her of her talent, her drive. She just gave me a tight, unreadable smile. I should have paid closer attention to the flicker in her eyes, that brief moment where something cold and sharp seemed to glint beneath the surface. But I was too consumed by the contract, by the endless checklists and simulations. The day of the audit arrived, crisp and nerve-wracking. We presented our findings, our assurances, our meticulously documented defenses. The DoD auditors, stern-faced and thorough, began their penetration testing. For hours, we watched, holding our breath, as they threw everything they had at the system. Nothing. Our defenses held. A collective sigh of relief, a ripple of quiet celebration. Then, the lead auditor called a sudden halt. He looked at me, his gaze chillingly direct. He played something. An audio file. My voice. It was me, my own words, twisted and mangled beyond recognition. Snippets of conversations with Serena, pulled from context, meticulously edited. My professional concerns about hypothetical system weaknesses, my candid discussions about ethical dilemmas, my private musings about the human element always being the weakest link. They were all there, weaponized. My careful explanations of how an attacker might exploit a particular vulnerability were presented as if I had already identified and deliberately ignored them. My introspective worries about the fallibility of even the best systems were spun into apparent admissions of unethical practices and potential security breaches. The rival firm, Sentinel Corporation, had supplied this intel to the DoD. They'd sabotaged us. The audit was declared a catastrophic failure. The contract, our lifeblood, was lost. My reputation, built painstakingly over a decade, shattered in an instant. The whispers started immediately, icy daggers piercing through the stunned silence. Misconduct, compromised, unethical. My world, my logical, predictable, safe world, imploded. The internal investigation began the very next day, a cold, clinical interrogation that felt less like seeking truth and more like a public execution. Legal repercussions were mentioned. I walked through the following days in a haze, the faces of my colleagues blurred with suspicion and disappointment. The hope Serena had brought into my life was replaced by a crushing, suffocating despair. The thought that she, of all people, could be behind this was too monstrous to contemplate. Yet a terrifying tendril of suspicion began to snake its way through the wreckage of my mind. The wreckage was total. My office felt like a crime scene, my reputation smeared across every digital screen in the company. The internal investigation was brutal, less about finding answers and more about finding a scapegoat. I was that scapegoat. Every meeting felt like an interrogation, every stare a judgment. My colleagues, once admiring, now avoided my gaze, their silence louder than any accusation. The weight of it all was suffocating. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The taste of betrayal was a metallic tang on my tongue, bitter and persistent. I dedicated my life to building firewalls, to protecting systems, and yet my own trust, my own vulnerability, had been exploited with surgical precision. I hit rock bottom in that sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room, listening to HR drones calmly discuss potential termination and legal liabilities. A cold fury, slow-burning and relentless, began to replace the despair. They could take my job, they could tarnish my name, but they couldn't take my mind, my skills. My formidable cybersecurity skills, the very ones they were now questioning, would be my weapon. I wasn't just facing professional ruin. I was facing a complete erasure of my identity. I wouldn't let it happen. I wouldn't go down without a fight. I retreated into my apartment, turning it into a command center. I started with what I knew. How could Sentinel Corporation have obtained such precise, damaging information? The audio clips were undeniably my voice, my words. The time frames of the incriminating discussions aligned perfectly with my deepest dives into client systems. It had to be someone close, someone I confided in. My mind, sharp and focused despite the emotional turmoil, began to connect the dots. The casual phone taps, Serena's notes, her knowledge of my projects. The possibility, once unthinkable, now loomed large, a terrifying shadow. I started digging. Every digital footprint, every communication log, every obscure metadata tag became a breadcrumb. I traced the origin of the leaked audio files, not just the ones presented to the DoD, but their original source. The trail was faint at first, encrypted, obfuscated, but I was a master of digital forensics. I burrowed through layers of proxies and burner accounts, fueled by coffee and a burning need for truth. Days blurred into nights. My fingers flew across the keyboard, driven by a raw, visceral need for vindication. And then, I found it. A series of encrypted chats, masked IP addresses that ultimately led back to a specific server farm, then to a burner phone. A payment transfer from an offshore account, routed through a cryptocurrency tumbler, but with a unique identifier that, when cross-referenced, linked directly to an account Serena had once mentioned. Then, the clincher, a meticulously hidden folder on a cloud drive, accessed from an IP address routinely used by Serena, containing not just the edited snippets, but the raw, unedited recordings of our conversations. Her internal notes, chillingly detached, detailing how to best leverage Ryan's candidness. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, sickening rhythm. The evidence was irrefutable, damning. Serena. It was always Serena. The girl who made me feel seen, who dissolved my loneliness, was the architect of my destruction. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a cold, hard truth that turned my stomach. The despair shifted, evolving into a burning, righteous anger. The confrontation was inevitable. I didn't want to do it in a sterile office, surrounded by the ghosts of my ruined career. I wanted it to be personal, raw. I found her at a quiet CAF, the kind we used to frequent, a place of shared jokes and stolen moments. She looked up, a bright, disarming smile on her face that quickly faltered when she saw the grim set of my jaw, the deadness in my eyes. Ryan, what's wrong? You look awful, she said, her voice laced with a practiced concern that now sounded like mockery. I didn't answer. I just pushed my laptop across the table, open to a screen filled with damning evidence. The chat logs, the payment transfers, the folder of raw audio files, her notes. Her eyes scanned the screen, her composure cracking, then hardening. The smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold calculation. What is this, Ryan? Some kind of joke? She asked, a tremor in her voice. Joke? You destroyed my life, Serena. You sold me out for a promotion you didn't get, for a twisted sense of revenge. You used every vulnerability I ever shared, every secret, every moment of trust. You recorded me. You edited my words. You orchestrated this whole damn thing. My voice was a low growl, controlled only by the sheer force of my will. She tried to deny it, of course. Ryan, you're mistaken. Someone must have framed me. You know how the corporate world is. I would never don't. Don't insult my intelligence again. I cut her off, my voice rising slightly. I have everything. Every digital breadcrumb. Every link to Sentinel Corporation. You're finished, Serena. Professionally, legally. You engaged in corporate espionage, using my trust as your weapon. Her face went pale, her eyes darting around the CAF. The cunning hacker, so brilliant at manipulation, was finally cornered. The bravado melted away, replaced by a desperate fear. The sight gave me no joy, only a profound, aching sadness for what we once were, for the beautiful, intricate lie she had crafted. I watched as the legal system, slow and ponderous, eventually caught up to her. The evidence I'd meticulously gathered was irrefutable. Serena was exposed, facing corporate espionage charges, her reputation in tatters, professionally ostracized. It wasn't the revenge I craved, but a liberation from the suffocating weight of injustice. I was cleared, eventually, the internal investigation concluding with my full exoneration, a public statement from Veridian Security acknowledging my innocence and the egregious nature of the attack. But the damage lingered. The whispers had stopped, but the memory of them, of the doubt in people's eyes, never would. The company offered me my old position back, a promotion even, a public apology for the unfortunate misunderstanding. But I couldn't stay. The halls felt haunted, the air thick with the ghosts of betrayal. I looked at the familiar faces, the gleaming servers, and knew I had to forge a new path. It was a bittersweet decision, leaving the place that had been my professional home for so long, but it was also a profound sense of release. A new purpose was simmering, born from the ashes of my despair. I wouldn't just rebuild my firewalls. I'd build better ones, for others. Leaving Veridian Security was like shedding a skin. It was terrifying, exhilarating. I took a deep breath, the Denver air feeling sharper, cleaner. I poured every ounce of my expertise, every late-night hour of painstaking research, into something new. I started my own independent cybersecurity firm, Aegis Digital Forensics. The name was deliberate, a shield against the unseen threats, a promise of protection rooted in my own painful experience. We specialized in digital forensics and ethical security, helping individuals and companies navigate the murky waters of cyber espionage, identity theft, and data breaches. My personal trauma became the fuel for my mission, transforming my pain into a fierce advocacy for digital privacy and ethical conduct. It wasn't easy. The first few months were a grind, long hours spent networking, building a client base from scratch. But there was a quiet satisfaction in every success, every client I helped. I became a different kind of hacker, one who used his powers for absolute good, driven by an unshakable belief in justice and truth. Serena's betrayal, once a gaping wound, slowly began to scar over. I never truly forgave her, not in the sense of forgetting, but I understood the twisted logic of her ambition, the depth of her insecurity that led her down such a dark path. That understanding, cold and clear, brought a different kind of peace. My social awkwardness never completely vanished, but it was tempered by a newfound confidence, a quiet authority forged in the crucible of my experience. I learned to trust again, cautiously, discerningly. I found a quiet strength in my vulnerability, knowing that it was my capacity for trust, however misplaced, that ultimately led me to uncover the truth. My life wasn't what I had envisioned, a predictable path in a corporate giant, but it was richer, more purposeful. I was building something real, something that mattered. The bitterness still surfaced occasionally, a phantom limb ache, but it was always accompanied by the profound sweetness of liberation, of having found my true calling amidst the ruins of betrayal. I became the firewall I always needed, not just for myself, but for those who had yet to learn the painful lesson of trusting too much, too soon, in a world that was always just one click away from compromise. The system, like life, always has a vulnerability, but knowing that makes you stronger, more vigilant.